Tashitale, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to you all, and happy Women's Day to everyone. And welcome again, Gyalten Lekden, to this online class. Everyone, we are so pleased to have Venerable again with us, and Venerable has been tirelessly coming to the center and keeping the teachings going on in the center. It's not an easy task. I've been looking at the schedule that Venerable has been giving us, and I've been talking to him about it. Tireless is the word for it because Venerable is also a student who is studying for their own education, but giving and carving out such a whole chunk of time, and we need to use this properly. And we are all very grateful, Venerable, that you are with us again today to lead us through Acharya Shanti Deva's A Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. This is a very, very important text for Choe Khor Sum Ling, and it has been advised by His Holiness that we all study it, and by Kyabji Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So let's all keep our mind ready for a beautiful text, and may its imprint stay in us forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. As we begin our session today, let's create a very intentional space. Whatever we've been up to all morning, whatever worldly activities have occupied our mind and our attention up to now, let's put those to the side. Allow ourselves to be fully present in the space together, even if it is a digital space. It doesn't matter where we are, in our office, our living room, our bedroom, anywhere. We create a sacred space for ourselves to engage in the study and the practice of the teachings of the Buddha. So allow all of your worldly distractions to be put to the side so you can be fully present. Now set a very strong motivation that the reason we are coming together this morning, the reason we are studying the teachings of the Buddha, and specifically the teachings of Shantideva as taught in his Bodhicharyavatara, is not merely for our own benefit, but so that we might be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings. We recognize that as we travel the path to Buddhahood, we'll find more peace, more contentment, more relaxation even in our own lives due to the hard work and effort of accumulating virtue and merit. But the goal is not for our own benefit, but so that we might develop the technique, the skill, the method, along with the wisdom that will allow us to be of maximum benefit to others. And so therefore set the strong motivation that I'm here today to look at my mind as it relates to the Bodhicharyavatara and the teachings of Shantideva, so that I might maximize my capacity to be of service to other sentient beings and to help free other sentient beings from suffering. And with this motivation strong in your mind, let's offer some preliminary prayers. We'll start with refuge and bodhicitta, which we'll do 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we will continue with the other prayers in English. Sangye churan soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola penche sangye drupar shok. Sangye churan soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola penche sangye drupar shok. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu pardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola penche sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So we'll offer mandala offering once in Tibetan and once in English. 사시피기 조심해도 Tramriablinki Nidegen Bandi Sange Shingdu Mikte Oi Jokunamai Shingla Chiparsho. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hiram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Continuing. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, the supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage. To all, worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we'll continue with the Heart Sutra to remind ourselves of the importance of understanding emptiness, the nature of reality, the antidote that uproots all of our self-grasping mind and all of the afflictions that arise from self-grasping. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear one time the Bhagwan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld the five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding these five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tadyata om gate gate paragate parasam gate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. We'll continue with the prayer to overcome obstacles and hindrances. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical illumination, look after practitioners like a mother after her only child. Akasamartha Shadara Samaya Pe Akasamartha Shadara Samaya Pe Akasamartha Shadara Pe Akasamartha Shadara Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Pet Adyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. By the teaching of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed. May they be dispelled. May they be pacified. Chintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. So, as we continue with our Sunday morning teachings, I wanted to start by reminding people that you can ask questions at any time. If any questions come up from the text as we study it or that are inspired by the text, feel free to ask them. Try to keep I don't mind being interrupted. I probably won't see you if you put it in the chat or raise your hand, so I don't mind being interrupted. But try to keep the questions in line with whatever the text is right now or whatever it is I'm talking about or something directly related to that. If you have additional questions, you can maybe ask them at the end if we have time in the Q&A at the end, or you can always email me. I think Deepti will share my email address in the chat if you like. And we do try to ask people, even if you have a lot of questions, to try to keep it to a few to make sure everyone has a chance to ask questions, that if other people have questions, that one person doesn't take up all the time. Now, I also say next week, we have a special ceremony. We are doing a big offering ceremony called the Aloka offering. We've done it a few times at CKSL, and we had wanted to do one this year around Losar and the Day of Miracles, but the timing didn't work out. So we're doing it next week instead when I'm going to be at CKSL in person. The Aloka offering isn't going to take up the whole Sunday class, though. So the beginning will be like a normal class, and I'll give the class on Bodhicitta, especially, and the Bodhisattva vows. And we'll do a small ceremony for people that want to take Bodhisattva vows. If you have already taken Bodhisattva vows, then you renew them with the rest of us. If you haven't taken them and you want to take them, it's an opportunity to. You have to have already taken Pratimoksha vows, so the vows of a layperson. And when you take Bodhisattva vows, you don't have to take them from a Lama, from a guru. You can just take them from the Buddha as well. So you don't have to be accepting the person offering the vows as a teacher. You can be taking them from the Buddha, and I act as an intermediary. So anyone that does want to take them, I encourage you to study them. We're going to talk about them next week and the importance of the Bodhisattva vows. But that is just an opportunity for us to accumulate as much merit as possible before we then do the Aloka offering ceremony. And so I'll talk more about that next week, but if you have questions, feel free to ask them at the end of class today. And with that, I think if we have a chance, to study the Bodhisattva vows in one class is not really enough. I taught a class, I don't know if it was for CKSL. I think maybe it was for an FPMT center in America on Bodhisattva vows. It was a 6-week class, right? There are 6 sessions just on the vows. So I encourage everyone to study the Bodhisattva vows. And even if you don't have Pratimoksha vows, or you're not going to be taking the Bodhisattva vows next week, I still encourage you to study them. Of all the vows, you are able to you're able to and encouraged to study the Bodhisattva vows before you take them. Some of the vows, like when you become a monk or a nun, those vows, you are not allowed to study them before you take them. The Vinaya, the vows that guide, the Pratimoksha vows that are given to monks and nuns, you only study them after you have already taken them, right? But the Bodhisattva vows, we're encouraged to study them beforehand because they're so important. The Bodhisattva vows are what propel us to Buddhahood. So we're encouraged to study them beforehand. So I encourage you to study them on your own. There are a number of great texts. The FPMT has resources available as well. So with that out of the way, as we begin today, I'll remind us of what it means to try to cultivate the attitude of an appropriate student. So we want to cultivate the attention or the attitude that avoids the 3 faults of a faulty pot or a faulty water vessel. So the first one is we don't want to be like a pot that is turned upside down. So when a pot is turned upside down, no matter how much water you pour onto it, it'll always remain empty. And in the same way, we don't want to be closed-minded whenever we begin a Dharma teaching, whether that's our own personal study, our own personal meditation practice, or we're attending a teaching like this. We want to be open-minded and receptive, right? We don't want to be closed off. So we want to avoid the fault of being like a pot that is upside down. We want to avoid the fault of being like a pot that has a crack in it. So if there's a pot with a crack, then no matter how much water you pour into it, it's just going to drain out. And in the same way, we want to be attentive. We want to be diligent. We want to exert effort into our study and into our practice and develop a mind of alertness and awareness and mindfulness even as we engage in this study and practice. So that's avoiding the fault of being like a pot that has a crack in it. And lastly, we want to avoid the fault of being like a pot that has a stain on the inside. The pot is stained with whatever used to be held in that pot, then no matter how much crystal clear water you pour in, it's going to be tainted by whatever was there before. And in the same way, when we approach the teaching, not only do we want to be open-minded, not only do we want to be exerting effort, but we want to not come in with our own prejudice or our own presuppositions, right? So we want to not just be receptive, but also not bring any of our own baggage with us. So we want to be open-minded and not prejudiced as we begin or as we engage in any type of study. So these are the three faults we want to avoid. So I encourage you just to think about them and to check that your mind is not clinging to any of those faults, right? That your mind is not like a pot that is upside down, or one that has a crack in it, or one that is stained. Those are very, very commonly taught in the very beginning of the Lamrim, Gyalten Kapa's Lamrim Chemo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. It opens with talking about the excellence qualities of a teacher, like what it means to have a good teacher. But then you have what it means to be an appropriate student, right? So in order for us to learn, it's not good enough that we have the appropriate teachers that are offering teachings of the Dharma. We have to bring our minds to the teachers in such a way that we're able to actually receive the Dharma that they're sharing, right? So it takes both. You have to have an appropriate teacher, but you have to be an appropriate student as well. So it's important, that we cultivate these attitudes that allow us to receive the teachings. And the truth is, if you don't work on this, for some people it's natural, especially people that have studied in in a worldly way at university or something. They've done a lot of study. Then maybe this is a natural way to go about studying. But for others, we're used to having our own opinions. And so even though we're actively coming to a Dharma teaching, we still come in with our own opinions, with our own ideas, with our worldly views, and we're very cynical, right? Not just skeptical, but we're cynical, where our ego is telling us, I kind of know what's right, and I'm just looking for someone else to agree with me, right? That's the way we go about things. We don't do it on purpose, but that's just our habit, right? So even though these things seem pretty elementary, it's important for us to think about them and check our behavior, and especially if you hear a teaching that doesn't really that kind of rubs you the wrong way a little bit, then you should check and you say, what is it about this teaching that I don't agree with? Is it something instinctual, or do I have an actual reason for it? And if you have a criticism or a doubt, then bring it up, right? That is perfectly valid. But there's a difference between being skeptical, which is to say, don't accept everything at face value just because I said it, or even because the Buddha said it. Accept it because it makes logical sense and you have an experience that can then justify it. So you can be skeptical, but don't be cynical, which is to say, don't take your ego and don't involve your self-cherishing mind in that skeptical approach. And so adopting or avoiding the three faults of a faulty vessel or a faulty pot is an important way to bring ourselves fully to a teaching. And the reason it's important that we think about what it means to be an appropriate student is because that lines up with thinking about what it means to be a Dharma practitioner, what it means to engage in spiritual practice. Because I think the truth is, we are capable of so much more than we think. All of us are, right? I mean, at the base level, we say all sentient beings have the exact same capacity to become Buddhas, right? This idea of Tathagata Garbha, of the seed of enlightenment. And that's true in a very vague, abstract sense, right? That is this great equalizer. But even in a more immediate sense, as human beings who are in control of our faculties and who have access to the teachings of the Buddha and have an interest in the teachings of the Buddha and have means to go about studying them and practicing them in our lives, we have within our grasp such a capacity to do so much more than we could ever think of, right? And the only thing holding us back is our minds. is us. Now, it's true, we don't all have the same resources. We don't all have the same external conditions. And external conditions can definitely make things more difficult. I'm not denying that, right? But ultimately, in terms of making spiritual growth and progress on a spiritual path, becoming closer to Buddhahood, our external conditions aren't what are causing the obstacles to that, even if they're very difficult external conditions. The real obstacles come from our own minds and the obstacles we create for ourselves. So we are capable of so much more than we think. But it takes courage and it takes resiliency, which is why the Bodhisattva is referred to as a warrior, right? Bodhisattvas are known as warriors. You need courage to be a bodhisattva. So developing a mind of bodhicitta takes courage, right? It's not something for the weak. It's not something for the feeble-minded. And so bodhicitta, though the mind that has an aspiration to achieve perfect complete Buddhahood for the benefit of sentient beings, of other sentient beings, bodhicitta itself is preceded necessarily by minds of great love and great compassion. And great love and great compassion are minds that have as their objects all sentient beings, right? All sentient beings, which is why we offer that verse of the immeasurables, the four immeasurable qualities that we're trying to cultivate in the beginning of the class. Love is the wish for all sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. And great compassion is the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So in that way, love and compassion are like two sides of the same coin, right? But great love, great compassion doesn't take a single object, a single sentient being as its object. It takes every single sentient being. The sentient beings that are kind to us, and the sentient beings that are mean to us, the sentient beings we don't know, the sentient beings that are our intimate partners, friends, and family. Every single sentient being equally has to be the object of our love and our compassion. Without that extreme equality in the way we apply love and compassion, we'll never develop bodhicitta, because bodhicitta is not it's not choosy. It doesn't pick only one sentient being or another. Bodhicitta has to encompass every single sentient being, and therefore our love and our compassion have to encompass every single sentient being, which is difficult. It's very, very difficult for us. That is not what we're used to doing. So it takes courage and it takes effort, right? It doesn't come naturally to us. And there are a few reasons, right? One is our minds and our experiences are conditioned by the self-cherishing mind, the mind that says, I'm more important than everyone else. And therefore, wishing for others to be happy, especially people that I don't know or people that I might think, people that I experience as causing me harm, is very, very difficult for us. Our self-cherishing mind fights against it tooth and nail. So from beginningless time, our self-grasping mind, the mind that looks at the self as if it truly exists the way it appears to us, then leads to the self-cherishing mind that says, my happiness is more important than your happiness. And that leads to all of our other afflicted minds, right? And all the suffering we experience is we can trace back to those two things. And so we have this imprint from beginningless time and beginningless rebirth that makes it difficult or not natural, quote unquote, to cultivate love and compassion and bodhicitta for all sentient beings. But then, in addition to that, the self-cherishing mind that has conditioned all of our experiences, also just worldly culture and worldly experiences and worldly expectations condition us against having love and compassion for all sentient beings, right? We're taught that we should be partial, that we should prefer one tribe over another, my country over your country, my gender over this gender, right? We're taught that we should create divisions and that we should seek out the small group that we align with and we should shun everyone else. Now, whether that's explicitly taught to us or implicitly taught to us through culture, through media, through all these things, that is part of being in the world right now. So we have multiple things working against us that are telling us to do the opposite of what we know to be the right spiritual thing. We have our self-cherishing mind and the self-grasping mind that is our innate inherent conditioning that is fighting against our wish to have love and compassion for all sentient beings. And then we have the world we live in, which is telling us to seek out our own pleasure and to seek out worldly delight and to not pay attention to those that don't look like us or that don't concern us or that maybe cause us some disturbance. So we have a war on two sides that we're fighting. One, we're fighting our own self-cherishing minds. That's the real enemy. But then we're also fighting the worldly experiences that we live in, right? We're fighting against samsara. So we have to look at it in both those ways. And we see how developing bodhicitta, it takes effort, but the practice of trying to cultivate bodhicitta and even having some small taste of it, some small taste of compassion and love, it becomes a tool or a weapon in our fight as well. That's the important thing to remember. This is all it feeds into itself. So the stronger compassion you have, the easier it is to then develop more compassion, if that makes sense. The easier it is to fight against the self-cherishing mind. And the reason that's important is that in our everyday lives, we need to bring compassion and love to our everyday interactions. Because if we don't, and we're reserving those minds only for our meditation practice, then we're seriously delimiting our own capacity to be happy. Because the truth is, what are the benefits, right? Whenever you try to cultivate bodhicitta, there's often talk about what are the benefits of bodhicitta. You should meditate on the benefits of bodhicitta in order to convince yourself it's worthwhile to cultivate it. And there are many different texts that list out different benefits. You can find a list of them in the Great Sages of the Path to Enlightenment. You can find a list of them in Asanga's The Bodhisattva Grounds. And even in Shantideva's text, in the first verses, the first chapters that are celebrating bodhicitta, you can pull out lists from there as well. And then many commentaries, both Indian commentaries and Tibetan commentaries, list all these different reasons or benefits of bodhicitta. So, such as the ones that I find most compelling. There are many of them, but the ones I find most compelling is one, you become a field of merit for others to experience happiness and to develop their own merit, right? When you act with compassion, love, and bodhicitta towards other sentient beings, you become the cause for their happiness. You become the cause for them to generate virtue. That's important, right? Because you're acting in such a way that is always aligned with virtue and with caring for others more than yourself. And as a result of that, you become an object against which other people experience happiness and other people create virtue. So bodhicitta empowers you in that way. And then equally important, maybe more important, is that as you develop bodhicitta, you no longer have any fear. You don't have fear of your death. You don't have fear of external enemies. You don't have fear of disaster or calamity, because those things all may still happen in your life. But your bodhicitta, your wish for others to be happy, and your wish for others not to have any suffering, your dedication that your own happiness is not the most important, means you don't fear what negative conditions may arise in your life or your experience. So you no longer become crippled by this fear, because you're not prioritizing yourself and your happiness and your worldly happiness, especially, as the most important thing in the world. Once you start prioritizing others' happiness more than your own, then all of these negative conditions that may affect your own well being, physical or emotional well being, don't become as important to you or don't become as terrifying to you. So, bodhicitta makes it possible not to have any fear. And on top of that, when we develop bodhicitta, it's very rare that we have anger or jealousy. And all of our afflictions and negative minds decrease, right? Now, bodhicitta itself isn't a complete antidote to the negative minds. And it's possible for a bodhisattva to have anger and jealousy and other afflicted minds until they have actually abandoned them, which is not until they've been practicing on the bodhisattva path for a while. So it is possible for bodhisattvas to actually have afflicted minds manifest, but it's very rare. And bodhicitta itself, when you're actively cultivating it, you're not creating any emotional space for those afflicted minds to become manifest. So even if we don't have genuine bodhicitta, but our bodhicitta is manufactured, it takes effort, right? Even then, we are making it much harder for our afflicted minds to overwhelm our experience and to control our lives. So bodhicitta itself makes it very rare for you to experience moments of anger or jealousy or any of the secondary afflicted minds that are associated with anger. And in general, all of your negative tendencies decrease, right? Or diminish. And lastly, another one that a benefit of bodhicitta that's really important to me is bodhicitta protects us from harm and from obstacles. And what do we mean by that? The reason it's important to me is bodhicitta isn't like a shield that's going to change the external conditions, right? But what bodhicitta does, again, similar to the very first, similar to protecting us from having any fear, bodhicitta relocates us and our ego from the center of our understanding of the world. And by doing that, no matter what difficult experiences we have, no matter what harms may come upon our body, we don't experience them as harm or as obstacle, because we no longer are concerned with our own happiness as the priority in our life. When our self-cherishing mind isn't the one controlling the show, then those things no longer actually serve as obstacles. We see those negative conditions that arise and that we experience, and we recognize them as opportunities to purify negative karma, and as opportunities to deepen our practice in the path, and as opportunities to be of more service to others by recognizing the type of suffering other people experience as well. So bodhicitta empowers that in us. Bodhicitta again, it's not like some magical cure that means once we have bodhicitta, we'll never be in difficult circumstances. But what is changing is how we relate to those circumstances, right? Bodhicitta itself is serving as that medicine that cures all of our diseases because it is changing how we relate to the world around us and how we relate to our experiences of the world around us. So in that way, those are what I see as, for me personally, some of the most important benefits of bodhicitta, or the ones that are most meaningful to me. There are other benefits, such as the fact that once you actually achieve bodhicitta, then you will be considered a son of the conquerors, right? You will be in line to become a Buddha. We say it's a son of the conquerors because the son is traditionally the one that becomes the king, especially in ancient India. So to be the son of a king shows that you are in line to rise into great power. And so in the same way, we are in line to become Buddhas. And by becoming a Bodhisattva, by adopting, actually generating bodhicitta, it puts us that much closer to becoming Buddhas. And there are many other good qualities like that about what different accolades we'll have as bodhisattvas. So it's important to remember these benefits. And the reason it's important is because when you're living your life and you're out at work or at school or you're dealing with family or friends and someone says something or someone does something and your first instinct is to react in anger or in frustration or out of desire or any afflicted mind. And then you have the moment that says, wait, I'm studying compassion and bodhicitta. I should act out of compassion and I shouldn't let my emotions react. You need to have some conviction behind that, right? If you just think, oh, it'd be better to act out of compassion, but really does it matter? Is it that big of a deal? Then you're not going to actually do it, right? You have this little intellectual nagging that says compassion may be better, and you say, I shut up. I'm going to do what I want, right? But when you have conviction that bodhicitta benefits you and other sentient beings, and it's only bodhicitta that benefits you and sentient beings in that way, then once you recognize that, oh, my first instinct was to act out of an emotional reactionary place that's born from my afflictions and for my self-grasping mind. Now that I realize that, acting out of compassion instead is more beneficial. Then as soon as you recognize that, you immediately act on it, right? You don't think about it. You recognize that you are acting out of your afflictions, and instead you reverse course right away, right? So having faith in the benefits of bodhicitta makes it easier to practice it and to practice love and compassion, which are the preliminary steps towards bodhicitta. The way this translates, I know a lot of time when I talk about these things, it seems very separate from my life. So I encourage you to think, how does this actually affect my everyday life? If I actually develop an attempt at love and compassion for all sentient beings equally, they say we should have love and compassion for all sentient beings the same way a mother has for her only son or her only child, which for all the parents I've spoken to, they tell me that sounds impossible, right? They say, how can I ever love every sentient being the same way I love my child? And I say, yeah, it does sound impossible. That's what we are expected to do. Not only are we expected to do that, that's something we are capable of doing because the Buddhas can do that, the Bodhisattvas can do that, and we are in the lineage of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We have the capacity to become them in this life, and therefore it is something we can do. But that is what is expected of Bodhisattva. So how does that affect the way I live my life, especially if you're living a householder life where you have responsibilities, right? Whether it be to your family, to your job, whatever it may be. And we could look at specific examples. Instead of doing that, I'll encourage you to think about this on your own. And part of the reason I advocate for engaging in meditation in the evenings, that you go through your day, I encourage you to go through all of your experiences of the day and say, if I had a mind of compassion when I engaged in whatever interaction that was, how would that have changed the interaction? How would that have changed my approach to the interaction? Could I have been more gentle? Could I have been more considerate of others? Could I have done something that prevented my own emotional dysregulation or distress? Right? Sometimes you have to engage in certain actions no matter what, especially if you have responsibilities in your job or to your family or to your education or whatever it may be. But we're not concerned as much with the external actions as we are with the internal actions. So if I change my motivation, how would that affect my experience of my everyday worldly actions, right? And how would my changed emotional calibration, how would that affect others around me? Right? When we go about our everyday lives, it is hard to live the life of Bodhisattva. To actually live a life that is only motivated by bodhicitta, it's so difficult because everything in the world is telling us to follow the self-cherishing mind, right? And all of the reasons that we would say, I can't do that right now, it's because the self-cherishing mind is in control. You know, I have to protect my good name. I have to stand up for myself. I have to defend whatever it is, right? I have to have enough food that I can be confident that I will survive the next month. My paycheck has to be big enough to pay for all these things. All of those minds are infiltrated with the self-cherishing mind because they're all looking at worldly concerns. Now, it's possible for us to try to bring bodhicitta mindset to our worldly activities, which is what we're called to do since we live in the world. But ultimately, a bodhisattva wouldn't have any concern for those things, right? And so it's hard to live your life as a bodhisattva. And you have to make compromises because this is samsara and we're worldly beings and we're doing the best we can with limited resources. And so when you have to make compromises, you have to make sure that you are not compromising on Buddhahood, that you're not compromising on being of service to others and taking care of others, right? So there's a distinction between a skillful understanding of your circumstances and your situation, right? And compromise, I suppose we could put it that way. So what you're compromising on is not on your goal of Buddhahood. You're not compromising on other sentient beings, but you're compromising on which different methods and means you're going to use to achieve that goal. And recognize that you aren't always able to use the perfect or ideal means because those are not always what are available to you. So you never compromise on Buddhahood. You never compromise on the happiness of others, no matter how difficult your worldly situation is. That's what is important to remember, which is why having a taste of wisdom, both conventional wisdom and ultimate wisdom, and using that to then help shape our practice of compassion and bodhicitta is really important. We need both wisdom and skillful means, or wisdom and compassion. They work together. So this text is all about how a bodhisattva would live their life. And the first step, as we said, to become a bodhisattva is to develop bodhicitta. So really briefly today, I want to just talk about how we develop bodhicitta and the different meditations we can do to develop bodhicitta. So I want to talk through those now. Hopefully we'll have time to go through one of those meditations together today. And if not, we definitely will next week. And then we'll get into the text. Traditionally, there are two meditative techniques that we're taught to develop bodhicitta. Now, these aren't the only way, right? And depending on your imprints, depending on your experience in past lives, you may have other resources and may be much easier for you than others. So these aren't like set in stone that these are the only ways to do it. But these traditions come from extensive practice and study that show this is the most efficient way for our worldly minds to realign ourselves with cherishing others more than ourselves and with developing actual bodhicitta. So the first method comes from Asanga, from Acharya Asanga, and it's called the sevenfold cause and effect method, right? So many of you have probably heard of this. I'm just going to go over the steps very, very briefly. So even though it's sevenfold, so there are 7 steps in it, and the last step is actual bodhicitta, we often start with this idea of equanimity. So that's like a precursor. It's not included in the 7. What equanimity is the wish or the recognition that there is no distinction between your friends and your strangers and your enemies and strangers. That the label of friend, stranger, and enemy is something that you impute from your mind based upon your afflictions. Those people towards whom your relationship is overwhelmed by some sort of desire or attachment, you impute the enemy of friend. And those individuals toward whom your relationship is overwhelmed or mediated by anger or frustration or hatred, you impute the enemy of enemy. And those individuals who your relationship is overwhelmed or mediated by ignorance, you impute the label of stranger. But those 3 labels are mere imputations. They don't have any bearing on the quality or those of the sentient beings that you're looking at, right? Those are all projections from your mind. So equanimity is realizing there's no distinction between any sentient being in their wish to be happy, in their wish to be free from suffering, in their deservingness of being happy, and of their deservingness of receiving my compassion and my love and my bodhicitta, right? So that's equanimity, is showing that there's no distinction, and we can't distinguish or be selective and only like one sentient being over another. So in the 7 steps, the preliminary step is to develop a mind of equanimity that treats all sentient beings equally. Then the first step is to remember, or rather recognize, that all sentient beings have in some past life been our mother, right? So if we believe that we've been circling in samsara since beginningless time, we've had countless rebirths, then at some point, every other sentient being has been our mother. And so this is the hardest step, really, of the 7-point steps, is recognizing that faith, having confidence in karma and having confidence in past and future rebirths, and recognizing that as a result of those 2 types of conviction, every other sentient being has at some point been my mother. No, in this lifetime, they're not my mother. In this lifetime, they may be in some sort of antagonistic relationship with me, but in a past lifetime, they've been my mother. So developing a recognition of that. And then we remember the great kindness of our mother. That's the second step. Remembering all the ways our mother has been kind to us in this life and in past lives. Right? There are different lists of how we should remember the kindness of our mother. But the main one, especially as mammals, our mother has carried us in their body for between 9 and 10 months at great pain to themselves. And then they actually gave birth to us, which is also a great pain and discomfort to themselves. Our mother has taught us how to live in the world, how to take care of ourselves. And our mother has been willing to take on non-virtue if it brings about our happiness, right? And that's not even to say that that is a good quality, but it is showing how dedicated they are to us, that they're willing to do non-virtuous things to bring about our happiness. So we remember the great kindness of our mothers. And then we develop the wish to want to repay that kindness. If all of these sentient beings have been my mother in past lifetimes, and they have shown such incredible kindness towards me, then it's my responsibility to repay them, to show them equal kindness in turn. So you develop the wish to repay their kindness. That's the 3rd step, right? And then the 4th step is you develop great love. So you wish for all sentient beings to have all happiness and the causes of happiness. And then you develop great compassion. So the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. And then from great compassion, the bridge between great compassion and bodhicitta is what we call the altruistic mind or altruistic compassion. So in Tibetan, the word is laksam, which means like a greater mind. But we often say laksam nyingje, so the altruistic mind of compassion. So what that is if compassion is just saying may all sentient beings be free from suffering, the altruistic mind says it is my responsibility to free them from suffering. So it takes compassion and it turns it up a little bit, right? It says not only do I wish for them to be free, but it's my responsibility to free them. So that's what the altruistic mind is. And then the result after the altruistic mind is actual bodhicitta. So the realization that if I actually want to liberate all sentient beings from suffering, and if it's my responsibility to liberate all sentient beings from suffering, the only way I can do that effectively is to become a Buddha myself. So bodhicitta is the wish to achieve perfect, complete Buddhahood for the benefit of sentient beings, of other sentient beings. So those are the 7 steps of Asanga's 7-point cause and effect, right? It begins with the preliminary of equanimity, and then you have recognizing all sentient beings as your mother, remembering the kindness of your mother, wishing to repay that kindness, developing great love, developing great compassion, developing the altruistic attitude, and then developing bodhicitta. Now, the other method that we're taught, it comes from Shantideva, and it's the method of exchanging self and others. And it is taught implicitly in this text, in the Bodhicharyavatara. That's where it comes from implicitly. Now, the way we're taught the lineage of this practice, we actually say that Nagarjuna taught it implicitly, and that Shantideva picked it up from Nagarjuna, and he taught it implicitly in his text. And then it was made explicit by Atisha, by Lama Atisha, in his mind training teachings. But he only taught those to Dramtompa, and he only taught them in private, his heart disciple Dramtompa. And Dramtompa, again, only continued this teaching in private to Potowa, to Geshe Potowa. And Geshe Potowa taught this in private to Sharawa and to Langri Tampa. And they started teaching it in a more public way. And Langri Tampa composed the 8 verses of mind training. And Geshe Chekawa studied the 8 verses of mind training. And he wanted to study it with Langri Tampa. So he went out seeking Langri Tampa. but Langritampa had already passed away, and he found Sharawa instead. And Sharawa said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Langritampa has passed away already. You can study with me." And so Chekwa studied with Sharawa, and Chekwa is the one, Geshe Chekwa, who is responsible for then bringing this lineage to a more the real greater public domain. He's the one that started teaching it much more explicitly. So we trace it back to Shantideva and to the Bodhicharyavatara, but it's not explicit in the Bodhicharyavatara. It's different pieces from the Bodhicharyavatara that are then pulled together into this practice. And so this is a 5-point practice, which starts with equanimity, as we said, similar to the other one. And then, it doesn't start with equanimity. It starts with equalizing. So equalizing self and other means to recognize that there shouldn't be any distinction between my happiness and others' happiness. That, in fact, others' happiness is more important than my happiness because the others are numberless, and I am only one, right? So therefore, others' happiness is actually more important than my happiness. So that's what it means to equalize self and other. Is to prioritize others' happiness as no distinction from my own happiness. So equalizing is the first step from Shantideva. And then exchanging self and other. So to exchange self and other means to prioritize cherishing others and to get rid of the self-cherishing mind. Right? Exchanging the self-cherishing mind for the mind that cherishes others more than oneself. That's what it means to exchange. And then we practice Tonglen, which is the taking and giving. So we take suffering upon ourselves and we develop the wish to take all other sentient beings' suffering into our own mind and to give away all of our happiness. That's Tonglen, which comes directly from the mind training tradition. And then after Tonglen, we have this altruistic mind. And after the altruistic mind, we have bodhicitta. So those are the 5 steps according to Shantideva. Now, the way that we are often taught is taught directly by Tsongkhapa. And he teaches this explicitly in his Lamrim Chenmo, where he combines those 2 methods. He combines Asanga's method and Shantideva's method for this 11-point combined method. The 11-point combined method first starts with equanimity, recognizing there's no distinction between friend, enemy, and stranger, except for the mere labels that we impose. And then we recognize that all sentient beings have been our mother. We remember the kindness of all sentient beings when they were our mother, but also the kindness of sentient beings when they were not our mother. We recognize that it's not only not only when they had the relationship of mother that they've been kind to us, but they've been kind to us in many other ways as well. So that makes that that memory of their kindness even stronger. Then the 4th step is again the wish to repay their kindness. So for the most part, these 4 steps are the same as Asanga's method, right? Equanimity, recognizing sentient beings as a mother, remembering their kindness, though this one's a little stronger, but remembering their kindness, and then wishing to repay their kindness. Now, the 5th step is we bring in equalizing. So once we wish to repay the kindness of all mother sentient beings, then we recognize that there's no distinction, there should be no distinction between wish for my happiness and my wish for their happiness. And in fact, other sentient beings outnumber me, their happiness is more important than mine. So that's the practice of equalizing. And then the next 2 steps, the first one is remembering all of the disadvantages of the self-cherishing mind. And then the 7th step is remembering all the advantages of the mind that cherishes others more than oneself. So these 2 steps, we do them sequentially, but combined, those constitute the practice of exchanging self for others, exchanging the self-cherishing mind for the mind that cherishes others as more important than oneself. So that is number 6, remembering all of the disadvantages of the self-cherishing mind, such as the fact that it brings about all of our sorrow, and it acts as a prison for our minds and for our experiences. And then number 7, developing the wish, remembering all the benefits of the mind that cherishes others as more than oneself. And now 8 and 9 combine as well. So 8 is considered compassion, and 9 is love, great compassion and great love, but these are done through the practice of Tonglen. So we recognize that when we take other suffering upon ourselves, that is the instantiation of compassion. And when we give away all of our happiness, that is a mind of great love. So we bring the minds of great compassion and great love into a Tonglen practice. Okay, so that is steps 8 and 9. The practice of Tonglen using great compassion and great love as the motivating factors to take all suffering from all sentient beings and give away all of our happiness to all sentient beings. And then the 10th step is this altruistic motivation that we talked about. And the 11th step is bodhicitta. So when you're engaging in your practice, you can meditate on all these points, right? And there are many different ways to do this meditation. You can do it where you set a timer and you focus on each of these 11 points for the same amount of time. And maybe you do 5 minutes or 10 minutes on each point. Or one day you can spend most of your time on step one and then do all the other steps in brief. Then the next day, spend most of your time on step two and do all the other steps in brief, like that. So there are different ways you can do this practice to try to build up your relationship to bodhicitta. Because the whole point of meditating on bodhicitta is to make it that bodhicitta no longer becomes something you have to think about, that it becomes something that's inseparable from your everyday mind. That's the whole point of meditation in general, is to become familiar with whatever the object is that we're meditating on. So if we want to actually develop the bodhicitta, if we actually want to live our life like a bodhisattva, we have to engage in all of this study that we're doing now so we understand what is the responsibility of a bodhisattva. How does a bodhisattva go about living their life? How does a bodhisattva deal with the obstacles that they face? But we also then have to try to emulate the life of a bodhisattva. And the most important part of that is bodhicitta, recognizing how bodhicitta infiltrates every aspect of a bodhisattva's life, right? So this practice is very common to try to generate bodhicitta and to make our minds familiar with it. So these are the different methods taught in our tradition to generate bodhicitta. Okay, from there, let's go to the text because I've been talking enough, and I want to try to see if we can get some progress in the text today, especially since next week we have a break from this text. So Shantideva, as we know, a 6th century yogi from India, or he was in India in Nalanda Monastery. He's famous for writing these two texts. This is one of them. We're not writing it, but composing it. And this text, as we talked about, the first section, if we break it down in the first 3 chapters, teaches how to develop bodhicitta. Those are the first 3 chapters. Then the next 3 chapters teach how to protect your bodhicitta from degrading or degenerating. And then the final 3 chapters teach how to increase your bodhicitta and to make it more prosperous. And then it ends with a chapter on dedication that is outside of the other outline. And within those 9 chapters, it also teaches the 6 perfected activities of bodhisattva, the 6 paramitas, right? So in chapters 1 and 2, it teaches the practice of generosity. Excuse me, in chapters 2 and 3, rather, it teaches the practice of generosity. In chapters 4 and 5, it teaches the practice of morality. And then 6 is patience. 7 is joyful effort. 8 is concentration. And 9 is wisdom. So those are the 6 perfections as taught across the 9 main chapters of this text. Now, right now, we are near the end of chapter 4. So if we understand where that is in the outline, firstly, we understand that chapter 4 is part of the section that is teaching us how to protect our bodhicitta from degenerating, right? So that's the first thing we have to remember. And also that it is teaching morality, or the perfection of morality. Chapter 4 and 5 work together to teach the perfection of morality, also known as ethical discipline. And the main subject of chapter 4 is conscientiousness, right? So it's important for us to think, well, how does conscientiousness, which works with chapter 5, which is on awareness, protecting awareness or vigilance, how do these 2 mental attitudes work together to protect our morality, to teach the idea of ethical discipline? And how does ethical discipline then help us prevent our bodhicitta from degenerating? So those are important things to think about when we study a text like this, which is why the outline is useful to think about. And we've already talked about that at length since we're quite far into this chapter. So I won't go over that in too much more detail, but it's worth reminding us because it helps us create perspective for why we're reading a text. That it's not just this abstract method, right? The text is teaching in a certain sequence for a certain order with a certain goal in mind, both a short-term goal and a long-term goal. The long-term goal, obviously, is to lead us to Buddhahood, but the short-term goal is to help protect our moral discipline through developing conscientiousness and awareness and recognizing how that then prevents whatever bodhicitta we've managed to develop, whether it be actual bodhicitta or fabricated bodhicitta, prevent that from declining, right? So we can see how all these things work together. Now we are on verse 37, actually, right? We made it to verse 37. 36 we finished last week. So if we were to look at further outline, right, we covered a whole bunch of verses 2 weeks ago that were considered developing conscientiousness with regard to developing virtue, right? And then we started a new section last week, which was developing conscientiousness with regard to abandoning non-virtue. And within that category, there are 3 subcategories. So, in the one we're covering today, so the 3 subcategories, just so I give us the clarity of them, is the first one that we did last week, is contemplating the drawbacks of the afflictions, right? And then this week, the subcategory is the incorrectness of being weary at the austerities that come with practicing the abandonment of the afflictions. It's very wordy. Sorry. Tibetans aren't known for saying things in short sentences when they can say them in long sentences. But so it's the recognition that when you're working to abandon the afflictive minds, it takes effort, right? And that is a natural part of trying to shed this worldly mind, is you have to exert effort at abandoning the afflictions. And doing so can make you weary. That's appropriate. But then to allow that weariness to overwhelm, to say that it's too difficult to practice whatever austerities are needed to abandon the afflictive minds. That is what we're trying to avoid, right? So it's inappropriate to have that kind of weariness. So that's what these verses we're going to discuss today. And these are verses 37 through 44. So I thought we'd start by reading verses 37 to 44, and then we'll go back and discuss them. Okay? So verse 37, we'll start there. And if engaged in a violent battle, vigorously desiring to conquer those whose disturbing conceptions will naturally bring them suffering and death, men disregard the pain of being pierced by spears and arrows, and will not withdraw until the day is won, then what need to mention that I should not be faint-hearted and slothful, even if I am caused many hundreds of sufferings, when now I strive to definitely overcome my natural enemies, these disturbing conceptions, which are the constant source of my misery. Even if scars inflicted by meaningless enemies are worn upon the body like ornaments, then why is suffering a cause of harm to me, who impeccably strives to fulfill the great purpose? If fishermen, hunters, and farmers, thinking merely of their own livelihood, endure the sufferings of heat and cold, then why am I not patient for the sake of the world's joy? When I promised to liberate all those beings dwelling in the 10 directions as far as the ends of space from their disturbing conceptions, I myself was not yet freed from mine. Thus unaware of even my own capacity, was it not somewhat crazy to have spoken like that? But as this is so, I must never withdraw from vanquishing my disturbing conceptions. And to do this will be my sole obsession. Holding a strong grudge, I shall meet them in battle. By disturbing conceptions such as these, destroy disturbing conceptions, and for the time being, they are not to be abandoned. It would be better for me to be burned, to have my head cut off, and to be killed, rather than ever bowing down to those ever-present disturbing conceptions. So this is the section we're going to talk about right now. Again, this is why it is inappropriate to be weary at the austerities that come about as a result of abandoning the afflicted minds. And so if we start with the first one, right, the first 2 verses. Sorry. Okay. Trying to see the verses and see you at the same time is a little difficult. If while engaged in a violent battle, vigorously desiring to conquer those whose disturbing conceptions will naturally bring them suffering, men disregard the pain of being pierced by spears and arrows and will not withdraw until the day is won, then what need is there to mention that I should not be faint-hearted and slothful, even if I am caused many hundreds of sufferings? Because while I strive to overcome my natural enemy, right, the self-cherishing mind and all the afflicted minds. If we look at worldly examples of people going to war, right, no matter how much violence is enacted upon them, that just makes them more vigorous in their actions. And if people can be stirred up by such coarse mindsets, right, as that, then of course I should be able to rally the same amount of endurance and emotional fortitude when I'm fighting an actual enemy, the real enemy, the only enemy that can cause me real suffering, which is my own afflicted mind, my self-cherishing mind, right? So here, when it says vigorously desiring to conquer those whose disturbing conceptions will bring them suffering and death, So what this is reminding us is that as long as we are samsaric beings who are not working to develop a mind of spiritual practice, then the moment of death, whether it be death on the battlefield or death in your home, is a moment of incredible suffering because you haven't done the preparation to overcome the suffering of death, because that's what it means to be a samsaric being, right? So samsaric beings who haven't done any work, haven't done any spiritual work or inner work, as we could say, they are they have the state of beings who have suffering at the time of death, great suffering at the time of death. Doesn't just mean beings that are on a battlefield. So here it's describing sentient beings as reminding us that as long as we don't do the inner work, then we are the kind of beings who are essentially dead already because our suffering is so great that we don't even recognize how our suffering is causing more and more harm to ourselves and others in the future, or rather, how our afflicted minds are causing more and more suffering to ourselves in the future and to others, right? So if individuals, if warriors can develop this intense energy, this vigorous desire to conquer their external enemies, then we, knowing that external enemies don't really create our suffering, that they aren't real enemies, if we can see them developing that type of energy, we should be able to do the same thing, right? Now that we've actually identified the real enemy, then no matter how difficult it is, no matter if they can experience the pain of being shot by arrows or being abused, being, torn up by spears, if they can experience that and keep fighting, then we should be able to endure hardship to actually defeat the real enemy, right? So the importance of identifying the real enemy, which is the afflicted minds, being able to, and the self-cherishing mind and the self-grasping minds especially, being able to identify those, recognize with conviction that those are the actual enemy. Those are what bring about suffering. Then, once we've identified that, we should not be held back, even if we experience suffering or obstacles in our pursuit of uprooting those afflicted minds, of trying to destroy our actual enemy. So here it's just using the example of showing that it takes a warrior to be a bodhisattva. And in the same way, a worldly warrior who's fighting due to their afflictions will fight external enemies until they die with no compunction. We need to do the same thing, but fight the real enemies, right? So part of that is reminding ourselves that our afflictions have done nothing but harm us. That is all the afflictions do. All they do is create harm for ourselves and for others. It's easy to forget that. It's easy to think that some of our afflictions are actually helping us, right? That when I seek out my own pleasure, that when I seek out financial gain or profit, that I'm actually bringing benefit to myself. It's easy to fall into that trap. It's not true. The afflictive minds do nothing but harm us. That is important to remember. And that harm often looks like worldly happiness, worldly benefit. But worldly happiness is not happiness, it's samsara. So as long as we are seeking out samsara and labeling it happiness, we're always going to be disappointed. We're always going to be creating more suffering for ourselves. So in order to develop the conviction that I will do whatever it takes to defeat my actual enemy, that enemy being the afflicted minds, starting with self-grasping and self-cherishing, you need to have the conviction that self-cherishing, self-grasping, and all of the afflicted minds that come from them do nothing but harm you. They're not going to benefit you. And so the way you go about doing this is you think about different worldly attitudes you have that you think are benefiting you, right? And then you analyze, is this really benefiting me? Is this actually helping me? Or is it only providing a temporary relief from one type of suffering to give me a different type of suffering? You can read all the texts that you want, and you can listen to me talk till I'm blue in the face, but you have to look into your mind, into your experiences, and say, is this really helping me? When I get angry and I let that anger fuel my actions, was that anger actually helping me? Or was it making me see red and act in ways that were inappropriate and were harmful? Even if it gave me some sort of feeling of energy or motivation, did it actually benefit me in the long run? Even if it felt good in the moment, did it actually benefit me? Or did it just lead me deeper into samsara? Right? So those are what you have to analyze in your own life. It doesn't matter. I mean, you read these examples to give you the inspiration, but you have to do the work to see, do these negative minds actually benefit me? And the truth is, when you do that work, you'll see they don't. But I can say that, like I said, till I'm blue in the face, you have to do the introspection to actually have conviction in it. So moving to verse 39, it says, even scars that are inflicted by meaningless enemies are worn upon the body like ornaments, then why is suffering a cause of harm to me, who impeccably strives to fulfill the great purpose? We constantly impute value to things that are not valuable, right? So we look at battle scars and we say that these are things of value, that these are signs. We wear them as ornaments, right? That I have done something important. I have done something courageous. Now, this can be physical battle scars if we're talking about like warriors or soldiers, but also like emotional battle scars where I have fought through something. And we assign value to things that are not valuable. We assign value to all of the afflicted minds that we believe support us, when really all they're doing is condemning us. So we have a misunderstanding of what is valuable, what needs to be adopted, and what needs to be abandoned. Because our worldly experience is telling us that all the things that we need to pick up and hold and celebrate are the afflicted minds, right? That's what our worldly experience is telling us. So we are constantly being confused about what to adopt and what to abandon, what is valuable and what is not valuable, what is harmful. So here, if I can wear scars or battle scars as if they were ornaments, then how come I can't experience a small amount of suffering in my pursuit of Buddhahood, in my pursuit of abandoning all the afflictions and not be discouraged by that, you know? Um, you know, what are the real fears we have of practicing a spiritual path? And the truth is, some people are afraid of discomfort, like attending a teaching or meditating. You're afraid of discomfort, physical discomfort. You're afraid of emotional discomfort that you might have to analyze parts of your mind that you were hoping to not analyze. But also, we're just afraid of boredom. We're afraid of missing out on worldly pleasure. If I go do this and I'm not going to be able to go hang out with my friends, the more I study the Dharma, the less interested in I am in like going out to the bars and hanging out with my friends after work. And I miss those worldly pleasures. That's what we're afraid of. We're afraid of giving up our worldly pleasures. And the truth is, the more you practice, you don't have to give up happiness. The whole point of Dharma is to live a life filled with happiness for yourself and others. But you recognize that those worldly pleasures aren't the true source of happiness. They aren't bringing you contentment. All they're doing when you cling to worldly pleasures as if they're real happiness is they're causing you more sorrow, right? But we're afraid of that. We're afraid of giving up what we know, what we feel comfortable with. We're afraid of giving up some sorrow. We're afraid of being bored, of having to look at our own minds. These are the things that keep us from actually engaging in meaningful spiritual practice. These are the things that keep us from doing the work to abandon the afflictions, right? So we experience this kind of discouragement that says, I'm never going to be good enough to actually achieve a state where my spiritual journey can be fulfilling and rewarding because I've been in samsara so long. So therefore, it's not even worth it, right? We have that mindset. It's very easy, especially when we talk about bodhicitta and we talk about understanding emptiness. We realize that those are goals, but they're not goals that we're going to achieve overnight because they take effort. And so there is a type of austerity we have to adopt in the practice of abandoning the afflictions, and we can be discouraged. But the truth is that discouragement, all that does is it causes us more suffering. All that does is it creates more obstacles to our practice. Apathy, which builds off of that discouragement, creates even more. So we need to develop strong resolve. We need to be confident and have conviction that not only are the afflictions our actual enemies, but we are capable of destroying them, right? As I said at the beginning of class, we are capable of so much more than we think. We are so much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for because we let our doubting minds invade our mental space and control our lives. So we can't allow ourselves to be discouraged. Whenever we experience obstacles, discouragement or apathy just make those obstacles bigger. They don't actually help us overcome them, right? Worldly people adopt their afflictions as if they were friends. And this is a habit we have to break. We have to know what is necessary to adopt and know what is necessary to abandon. We have to abandon the afflictions, even though it takes effort, right? If fishermen and hunters and farmers, thinking merely of their own livelihood, endure the sufferings of heat and cold, then why am I not patient for the sake of the world's joy? We can look at worldly examples of people who are willing to endure great hardship in order to engage or to receive worldly benefit, right? It's a very clear example. And now, of the three livelihoods that they talk about in this verse, the first two are non-virtuous livelihoods because they involve taking of life, right? So not only are fishermen and hunters willing to endure like very difficult weather or heat, cold, all of the things that happen, the difficulties of those particular professions. Not only are they willing to endure it, they're willing to endure all those difficulties for the sake of engaging in non-virtue. Whereas at least a farmer also has to endure many difficulties to be successful at farming, but they're not doing it at least for the sake of non-virtue, because at least agriculture isn't always necessarily a non-virtuous livelihood. But if we can look at these worldly examples and we see how people are willing to adopt so many hardships for worldly goals, then can't we do the same thing for a goal that isn't worldly? And I'm sure many of you have experienced something similar, where you've been willing to put yourself through something difficult because you know there's a reward at the end, right? Think of even any of us who went to grad school, and you had to sit through your exams and you had to prepare for exams, whatever it may be. How much work did you put into study and preparation for things that you don't really care about, but you had to pass these exams? So you suffered through how many nights of studying just to pass the exams because the reward of passing the exams and getting a degree was worth it. Now, in the big picture, it's a very worldly goal. And maybe the suffering of studying for exams isn't that big of a suffering, but it's something we can relate to in our life. I'm sure that you can say the same thing about looking for a promotion in your job or many examples in your life where you willingly adopt suffering, a mild discomfort, or even a great discomfort, because you know that the results are something that you are seeking. So if you're willing to adopt suffering, or think of people who go to the gym every day, even if you're just going to the gym because you want to keep your body fit and healthy, never mind you want to be like a weightlifter or like, a supermodel, just you want to keep your body fit and healthy, you have to get up every day, you have to go to the gym, you have to go running, you have to go through all these things. You willingly endure physical suffering and distress for the purpose of worldly ends. How many of us have done this? It's very easy to think of an example in your life. So if we're able to look at these worldly goals and experience suffering for the sake of worldly goals, of course, we should do the same thing for spiritual goals. Now, again, I'm not saying you should jump into the lion's mouth, right? We're not seeking out suffering. But what we're saying is we've lived our whole lives following the self-cherishing mind. We've lived our whole lives conditioned by worldly expectations, and therefore, to free ourselves from all of the afflicted minds that are controlling how we understand the world is going to take effort and is going to take hardship. And know that it's going to take hardship, and I do it anyway because the goal of abandoning the afflictions, of having control over my mind, of being of service to others, is more important. Right? So I'm not seeking out suffering. I just recognize that my whole life has been conditioned by seeking out samsara as if it were happiness. And now that I'm trying to turn that upside down, that transition is going to be difficult. But I have faith and conviction that the more I do it, the easier it is. That as I engage in a spiritual practice and I find contentment and I realize that when I can look back at my day and see how I didn't allow myself to be affected by anger or by attachment or by the self-cherishing mind as much as I used to be, and I had control over my emotional reactions and I was able to lead with compassion, and I recognize that, I develop a sense of spiritual satisfaction, and that spiritual satisfaction compels me to keep engaging in this practice. I see how I benefit myself and others, right? So it is self-reinforcing, but we have to do the work, which is going to take effort because it's so different than how we've lived our lives up until now. Uh, I know it's um, not what everyone wants to hear, but Dharma practice is work. You know, it's not a holiday. I wish it was. It'd be so much easier if Dharma practice meant going on vacation. But we spent so long doing things backwards that to really remedy that, it takes effort. And that's okay. Like, you know, growing into who we are meant to be, growing into the to realize our full capacity. There's growing pains involved in that. Okay? It takes effort. It isn't a holiday. But as I said, the more you do it, the more it feels like a holiday. the more you feel contentment, the more you can recognize how you've overcome certain afflictions or you've overcome certain worldly ways of being, and you look upon that and you feel some sense of satisfaction and contentment, but you no longer resort to prioritizing your own needs above others. So it becomes easier and it becomes much more pleasurable, even in a worldly sense, as we do it, right? But it isn't effortless, at least not for me. I can't speak for all of you. Maybe some of you, it is effortless. I applaud you. That's wonderful. I rejoice. Most of us, it's going to take effort because we followed the self-cherishing mind for so long. We've been conditioned by worldly existence and by samsara for so long that we look at samsara and we think it's bringing us happiness, and all it's doing is bringing us suffering. So to turn that around, right, to flip everything we thought on its head is, counterintuitive, and it takes effort. But if the goal is Dharma, if the goal is Buddhahood, then why would we not put in the effort? Why would we not celebrate all of the effort we put in? Continuing, when I promised to liberate all those beings dwelling in the 10 directions as far as the ends of space from their disturbing conceptions, I myself was not yet freed from mine. Thus, unaware of even my own capacity, was it not somewhat crazy to have spoken like that? I think we need to be ambitious. That's what this verse is reminding us, that we have to realize that our goal is huge. The goal of becoming a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings is a huge goal, right? Look at where we are now and where Buddhahood is. We have to be ambitious. We have to recognize that we all exist in the lineage of Buddhas, that we have the capacity to become Buddhas, and therefore we shouldn't settle for second best. Our goal is to become Buddhas. And we know that my mind right now is not tamed. I've done work on my mind. I've improved my mind. I've meditated. I've studied. I've contemplated. I've done all the work. So my mind is definitely better now than it was 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago. But I still have a lot of work to go. So if I haven't realized freedom from the afflictions, how can I say that my goal is to become Buddha? Well, I have to say that's my goal. I have to be ambitious, right? And by reflecting on what it means to have such an immense goal, that helps put in perspective that I'm not going to achieve that tomorrow. I'm not going to achieve it overnight, but it is my goal. So every day I'm taking steps toward that goal. That's what I have to remind myself. Bodhicitta, living the life of a Bodhisattva. These are audacious goals. Okay. They're not normal. That's not how everyday people live. Everyday people follow their self-cherishing mind. They follow the mind that says their happiness is more important than anyone else's. That's what they're taught to believe. So to totally go against the grain, to totally go against what everyone says is normal, that's audacious. That is wild, right? It's bold. It takes courage, it takes strength, it takes resiliency, it takes resolve. And that is what we have to cultivate as a bodhisattva. And that is why having conscientiousness is so important, because we have to be aware of what our mind is doing at all times, how our mind is reacting to every single circumstance and to every other sentient being. If we're not aware, if we don't develop a sense of conscientiousness about how our mind is engaging with the world around us, then how can we ever help transform it from a worldly mind to a spiritual mind, right? When we think of the goal of bodhicitta, or the goal of Buddhahood, excuse me, we have to remember that Buddhahood and seeking out Buddhahood brings about not just our own happiness, but the happiness of all sentient beings, right? Now, when you realize that, then it makes that vast goal much more meaningful, because that goal is separating out you as an individual and is looking at all sentient beings and saying that me achieving Buddhahood, me progressing on a spiritual path, even if that just means taming my mind to the extent where I can meditate for an hour and not be distracted, right? If that's the next step in my path, if that is part of my spiritual path, the point of that is so I can free all sentient beings from suffering, not just benefit myself. And when you remember and remind yourself that the goal isn't about you and your happiness, but about all sentient beings, then no matter how big that goal is, you are filled with the motivation to continue working toward it and to celebrate how bold of a goal that is, how crazy of a goal that is. And you're motivated to recognize that even though I'm not in a place now where I can fulfill that goal, I've made the promise to do so because I see the benefits of it. And therefore, I'm going to work towards it with whatever capacity I have. Continuing, But as this is so, I must never withdraw from vanquishing my disturbing conceptions. And to do this will be my sole obsession. Holding a strong grudge, I shall meet them in battle. But disturbing conceptions such as these destroy disturbing conceptions, and therefore, for the time being, they are not to be abandoned. Sorry, my puppy apparently agrees with that verse, maybe, or doesn't agree. We'll see. I apologize. Right. So these verses, um, these verses come from a, objector, right? If there is a third party who says, "Wait a second, aren't we too attached to the antidote here? We're saying that our goal is to um, abandon all of our afflictions, and then we should look upon the afflicted minds as if they were our enemies. So therefore, aren't we too attached to this idea that we are trying to aren't we too attached to this idea to our own resentment towards the enemy, which is the afflicted minds?" Um, and what we're saying here is, so that's the objection, right? Are we too attached to the antidote? Especially this idea of labeling our afflictions as our enemies and therefore wanting to uproot our enemies. And the answer is, even though I haven't done the work yet, and even though my goal is crazy, and it has been crazy for me to make a promise, like the promise that I'm going to become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, if I haven't even done the work to abandon my own afflicted minds yet, even though that's crazy, my only goal has to be to uproot my disturbing minds, my afflicted minds. And here, what it's saying is, I have to hold a grudge against my afflicted minds. And so, holding a grudge in general is itself a type of affliction, right? So, that is the wordplay in this verse. It says, the disturbing conception, such as holding a grudge against my afflicted minds, itself disturbs or itself destroys afflicted minds. And therefore, for the time being, it is not an afflicted mind that is to be abandoned. Do you follow that? It's a little bit circular. But so it's like saying you should be angry at your self cherishing mind. So, in general, anger, this is not using the same words as the verse, but to make it a little simpler. Anger is never beneficial, right? Actual anger, the wish to harm others. But you should be angry at your self cherishing mind. Now, we say that the anger at self cherishing mind isn't actual anger, but it resembles anger, right? So then the objection is, well, isn't anger something you should abandon? And we say no, because this anger is not towards sentient beings. This anger is towards our afflicted minds. So even though we label anger as an afflictive mind, it's an afflictive mind that's really destroying our afflictive minds. And therefore, we shouldn't abandon the anger toward our self cherishing. Does that make sense? So it's a type of wordplay where it's recognizing that our real enemy is our self-cherishing and our afflictions, and therefore we should cultivate grudges against the enemy. We should cultivate resentment and anger against the enemy. But the enemy is not other sentient beings. The enemy is our afflicted minds. And therefore, that those grudges, that resentment, that anger towards the actual enemy of self-cherishing is not something that we should be abandoning. At least not now. The parenthetical part of this verse says, for the time being. So eventually, when we actually have conquered that enemy, then we'll have no need for anger towards self cherishing. And therefore, we can abandon it then, right? Naturally, by having conquered the enemy. So this verse is just a little bit of wordplay, recognizing that the language we use when we're trying to conquer our self cherishing in other contexts would be suggesting that we're adopting things that we should be rejecting, right? We're adopting anger as a means to destroy self-cherishing, but it's not real anger. It's just the anger focused at self-cherishing. So it's not actual anger in that way. So that's the wordplay in this verse. Even when we describe the self-cherishing mind as an enemy, again, we started out today talking about the fact that when you want to develop a mind to equanimity, you realize that the label of enemy is something that we have superimposed on other sentient beings. So then labeling the self-cherishing enemy is using that language. It's using worldly language and worldly examples to show the way out of worldly experience, right? Since we're worldly sentient beings, since we're samsaric sentient beings, these are the analogies, these are the examples that we are comfortable with. So the teachings use those. It takes advantage of our worldly experiences and uses those as mirrors to show us what we need to actually abandon to follow a spiritual path, right? And the last verse in this section is, it would be better for me to be burned, to have my head cut off, and to be killed, rather than ever bowing down to those ever-present disturbing conceptions. Now, this is a heavy verse, but it's showing the ultimate level of conviction that we need. When you really recognize how damaging the afflicted minds are, and your self-cherishing mind is, then you realize there is no worldly harm that can come about to your body that is worse than the harm you're doing to yourself through cherishing yourself more than others and through developing all the other afflicted minds, right? Which is why we say that no matter, until you've conquered the inner enemy, you can kill countless external enemies, but they'll never stop coming because they aren't the ones that actually pose a threat to you. The only real threat is your internal enemy. An external enemy, all they can do is kill my body, harm my body. But an internal enemy can cause me to create enough negative karma that I'm born in hell realms for countless lifetimes. Okay? So I should be willing to experience any sort of physical distress if it's in the sake of abandoning my afflicted minds. And that is a hard thing to wrap our heads around because we haven't actually developed conviction of how dangerous our afflictions are. That's the reason. If we had complete conviction in how harmful our self-cherishing mind is and our other afflictive minds are, if we actually felt that, understood it deeply and completely, then this would make perfect sense and there would be not even a moment hesitation, right? So that just helps highlight that we still have a lot more work to do. And that's fine. That's perfectly appropriate, right? That we are on our journey. But we have to develop conviction in how dangerous the inner enemy is. That we have to be willing to experience any sort of suffering in order to overcome that inner enemy. Let's continue. I think we can actually finish this chapter today. So this final section is the third subsection of how to develop conscientiousness with regard to abandoning the afflictions. And the third subsection is, first, right, you want to the advantages of abandoning the afflictions, the reason that you shouldn't allow yourself to become weary or discouraged at the austerity it takes to abandon the afflictions. And now this section is how to cultivate enthusiasm with your ability to abandon the afflictions when you apply effort, right? So it's cultivating enthusiasm at the work, the effort it takes to abandon the afflictions. And this is the next three verses, 45 through 47.
Venerable,
Yes,
may I ask a question? It's about
sure.
the burning and the cutting, the
Yeah.
extreme. But isn't it also, shouldn't we also consider that, let's say you do have this kind of an extreme and you do lose your life to, whatever, prevent a self-cherishing mind. I can't think how, but maybe you do. You have no guarantee that you will come back to practice the Dharma. So
Mm,
isn't it so that fear, I mean, is there? I mean, let me use this life with whatever advantages I have, and the fact that I have maybe somehow gotten into this, taken baby steps on this path. I'd
mm.
like to go as far as I can
Yeah,
in this
yeah,
life rather than saying, okay, you
yeah.
know,
No, I got it. So,
yeah.
um, again, we're not encouraging, the Dharma isn't encouraging us to seek out suffering or pain or difficulties. What this verse, especially, because you're right, right? There's no guarantee, though we've done the work now. So as we do the work to live the life of a bodhisattva as best we can, then that comes with it conviction. One of the benefits of bodhicitta is that it destroys entryway into the lower realms when you actually develop bodhicitta, right? So as we're working towards that, we're actively cultivating that mind. That makes it less and less likely that we'll ever be reborn in a lower realm because we're doing the work to reprioritize our life from focus on ourselves to focus on others. And that in and of itself then aligns us with understanding the nature of karma, understanding the nature of cause and effect, understanding the difficulties or the disadvantages of the 10 non-virtuous actions, and therefore we don't create the karma to be born in lower realms, or we don't create the conditions for negative karma we've already created to ripen as birth in lower realms. So practicing this path should at least give us some conviction that we're moving towards Buddhahood, which is to say that in the future, in future rebirths, we've done the work now to help continue our study and practice in the future. So we should have some confidence in that, right? Not 100% confidence. We want to make the most of every moment we have in this life because there's no guarantee, but we have at least some confidence that we're doing the right work, that we're pointed in the right direction. But then, with that said, something like this verse isn't suggesting that we should embrace harm, but it's saying that if we actually understood the afflictions and how dangerous they were, then we would recognize that my body being destroyed and me experiencing physical death is less calamitous than me encouraging my self-cherishing mind or my afflictions, right? So it's just an example to show how incredibly dangerous our afflicted minds are, especially self-cherishing and self-grasping. So in this verse especially is using it as an example to show us that what we hold most dear as worldly beings is this life, right? And we think this life is the most important thing there could be. And yet, to have this life ripped away from me is not as important as not conquering my afflicted minds. So that's what this verse is pointing us towards. Now, we do say that as you develop bodhicitta, one of the things you give to others is being willing to give even your own life and your own body to others. And when bodhisattvas achieve a realization of emptiness, a direct realization of emptiness, then they are able to give away their body. They've achieved a state of realization where they can actually give away their body without any resentment or without any anger, without any attachment to this body. Most of us haven't reached that stage yet, right? But that is a goal that we're aiming for. So I know that if I were to give away my body right now, like if my puppies were hungry and I had to like cut off a hand to feed them, I could not do so without resentment, right? Never mind my body, just like a part of my body. I know I couldn't. I wish I could, but I can't, right? I know that. As much as I care for those puppies, I wouldn't be able to do that. I don't have the spiritual maturation that would allow me to do that. But a goal is that because I still cherish my body, I still have this self-cherishing mind that says this body is something I care about, right? If I actually had achieved a higher level of realization, then I wouldn't have any attachment to this body at all. And I'd have confidence in my own practice that would propel me into continuing practice in future lives. And so that's what I'm working towards. But this verse specifically is just reminding us of how dangerous the afflicted minds are, that they're much more dangerous than an enemy who's willing to take our lives. And the afflicted minds, like I said, they are what will propel us to hell realms for over and over and over again if we indulge them, right? So they're much more dangerous than someone that can take away this one life.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yeah. So let's read the next 3 verses, which are developing enthusiasm. The last verse is a summary. We'll do that at the end. So 45. Common enemies, when expelled from one country, simply retire and settle down in another, though when their strength is recovered, then they return. But the way of this enemy, my disturbing conceptions, is not similar in this respect. Deluded, disturbing conceptions, when forsaken by the eye of wisdom and dispelled from my mind, where will you go? Where will you dwell in order to be able to injure me again? Weak-minded, I have been reduced to making no effort. If these disturbing conceptions do not exist within the objects, the sense organs, between the two, nor elsewhere, then where do they exist? How do they harm the world? They are like an illusion. Thus, I should dispel the fear within my heart and strive resolutely for wisdom. For no real reason, why should I suffer so much in hell? So these verses, like I said, are trying to encourage us to cultivate enthusiasm at our own ability to abandon the afflicted minds, right? So verse 45 is reminding us that when we've actually expelled the inner enemy, when we have totally abandoned it, it won't return, right? Now, I've talked before about antidotes. When we apply the antidotes, there's 2 types of antidotes to our afflicted minds. There are the antidotes that subdue afflicted minds, and there are the antidotes that uproot the afflicted minds. And we have to practice both. The ultimate antidote that will uproot the afflicted minds is recognizing the nature of reality, understanding emptiness. That is the actual antidote that'll totally abandon all of our afflicted minds. But there are many other antidotes that we cultivate that help subdue the afflicted minds to give us space to then practice and meditate and live in the world and develop bodhicitta. So, for example, we'll get to the chapter on patience, and patience is often talked about as the antidote to anger, and it's framed that way in this text. But the truth is, patience isn't the antidote to anger. Patience prevents us from developing anger in the first place. The actual antidote to anger, the complete opposite of anger, is love, right? So anger is wishing to harm others or having a mind that projects harm towards others. And love is wishing others happiness. So those are the exact opposites. So we can cultivate love when we're experiencing anger. Then we can cultivate patience to help take the edge off that anger, though usually patience we cultivate to try to prevent anger from arising in the first place. But if we have generated some sort of anger, then we can try to use love. We try to cultivate love instead, and that love subdues the anger. The love makes it impossible for that anger to be manifest. But it doesn't uproot the anger. It doesn't get rid of the anger. It only subdues it, so it isn't active in our mind stream at the moment. But actually recognizing the nature of reality, that is the remedy that uproots all of our afflicted minds. Because all of our afflicted minds come from self-grasping, from grasping at the self and all phenomena as if they truly exist the way they appear to our deluded minds. So this verse is reminding us that when we actually abandon the inner enemy, then they can't come back. Worldly enemies, if you kick them out of your country, they just go to another place, they regroup, they get their troops, they take care of their wounded and everything, and then they come back again. They recover their strength and they come and attack you again. But if we actually destroy the inner enemy, it has no ability to return. So we have to not only subdue it, which is what the temporary goal is, but we have to uproot it and actually defeat it, which is to say, abandon it. And the way we do this and so that's one way that the inner enemy and the outer enemy are not the same, right? And the way we go about that is by, as it says in the next verse, the eye of wisdom, right? So deluded, disturbing conceptions, when forsaken by the eye of wisdom and dispelled. So when you actually develop a mind that recognizes the nature of reality, then that is what expels the inner enemy. And there's nowhere left for it to go because you realize the nature of reality. You understand where all of your afflictions came from in the first place. By understanding their source, you don't give them any power to regenerate. So unlike a worldly enemy that can go find a safe harbor and regroup, the mind of wisdom, or the eye of wisdom as it says here, which is the wisdom that realizes the nature of reality, the wisdom that realizes emptiness, when we actually have even a small amount of that, then it totally overwhelms our afflicted minds and it prevents them from reoccurring. So this goes, even though right now we're talking about developing bodhicitta, we're developing bodhicitta as a way, or rather this chapter is about protecting our bodhicitta from denigrating, right? So in order to do that, we have to use wisdom. It's not the only tool we have, but it's one of the most effective tools, right? So again, even though this text is talking about primarily bodhicitta until we get to the 9th chapter, we have to remember that wisdom and bodhicitta are both necessary. We need both aspects of wisdom as well as what we call merit, which is the practices of Bodhisattva based in compassion and bodhicitta. Now, the end of this verse, where it says, "Where will you dwell in order to be able to injure me again?" So once I have the mind of wisdom that realizes the nature of reality, that realizes that the self is empty of inherent existence, then that defeats all of my afflictions, right? There'll be nowhere for them to exist. But since I'm weak-minded, I have been reduced to making no effort. So what that means is that by being weak-minded, what that means is that I'm under the control of my worldly minds, and I'm not actually looking at my real enemy, that I'm allowing myself to be distracted by my samsaric delights, by my attachment to samsara. And so I'm not putting my effort in the right place. That's what this line is reminding us, is that if I actually develop a mind that realizes the nature of reality, and I combine that with compassion and bodhicitta, then I'm able to entirely uproot the enemy, get rid of all my afflicted minds, and devote myself in a full, meaningful way to benefit others, right? But since I am focused on the external enemy, then I'm not putting my effort in the right place. That's what it means to be weak-minded. It means to be distracted by my attachment to samsara. and therefore I'm not making effort. And the truth is I am making effort, but I'm making effort in the wrong direction. I'm making effort to hold on tighter to samsara. That's what it means to be a worldly sentient being, right? So that's what this last line is reminding us. It says, even though I know that cultivating a recognition of emptiness is the actual way to uproot my afflicted minds, and that's because my afflicted minds are my real enemy. Since I'm not paying attention to the inner enemy and I'm focused on the outer enemy, I'm constantly distracted and I'm not putting effort in the right place. So I'm not working towards the right goal, basically. I'm working towards a worldly goal. And then lastly, this last verse says, you know, disturbing conceptions do not exist within objects. They don't exist in the sense object organs. They don't exist between them or elsewhere. So again, this is building on the idea of emptiness, right? Part of the reason that it's hard for us to overcome the afflictions is because we accept the afflictions as if they inherently existed. Our experience of attachment, of desire, of anger, of hatred, of jealousy, our self-cherishing, we just accept them as if they were inherently existent. And when we accept them as inherently existent, they become much bigger obstacles to overcome, because we think that they're impossible to overcome. They just exist the exact same way they appear to us. What this is saying is, where is your attachment, right? If I see a beautiful object and I have attachment towards it or desire towards it or lust to it, is that mind of desire or attachment, does that exist in that object? No. Does it exist in my mind, my eye sense consciousness that perceives that object? No, that's not where the attachment exists. Does it exist in the relationship between the object and the eye sense consciousness that perceives it? No, it doesn't exist there. And does it exist somewhere other than the relationship between the eye sense consciousness and the beautiful object it perceives? No, it doesn't, right? It doesn't exist inherently anywhere. The attachment or whatever disturbing emotion of afflictive mind is, that is not inherently existent. It exists in a way that is like an illusion, in the same way that all of our perceptions are like illusions. The way we experience the world is through our own deluded minds. So the way we perceive the world and the way the world really exists are not the same thing. That's what it means to understand the nature of reality. That's what it means to try to understand how our self-grasping mind imputes our experiences, and then we accept those imputations as if they were fact, right? So applying the idea of wisdom, not just to the self, to say that this I that I grasp onto doesn't exist the way it appears, but it's reminding ourselves that even our afflictions, the most dangerous inner enemy, they don't exist the way they appear either. There's something that we can conquer, because those afflictions, that self-cherishing mind, that attachment, that anger, all of those things, they're illusions. They don't exist the way they appear. They aren't actually as powerful as they seem. And the reason for that is their basis is inherently how do you say, unstable. Their basis is not stable, because their basis is a self-grasping mind that accepts everything to exist the way it appears. That is an unstable basis, but that's where all of our afflictions come from. So they are eminently conquerable, right? That's what we have to remind ourselves. And that's what this verse is reminding us. After saying how dangerous they are and reminding us that it'd be better for us to die than it would be for us to engage or indulge our afflicted minds. That's how dangerous they are. Yet they are not something that we cannot conquer. We have more capacity than we know. We can do so much more than we give ourselves credit for. We have the capacity to develop actual compassion and bodhicitta for all sentient beings. We have the capacity to understand that things don't exist the way they appear to us, and through that wisdom, uproot our afflicted minds. We have the capacity to live in samsara amongst worldly beings, and yet do so in such a way that is propelling us and other sentient beings towards freedom from suffering. We all have the capacity to do that, right? And meditating on compassion and bodhicitta, as well as emptiness, work together to help us realize that infinite capacity that we have. So this doesn't involve just meditation. Meditating itself has to come from study, right? If we don't study, then when we go to meditate, who knows what we're meditating on? It's very easy to not understand these topics correctly. And so we have to combine study and meditation, which is why we often say study, contemplate, and meditate. All three have to work in concert right? We have to learn the material, we have to engage it, we have to bring up our own doubts and then clarify those doubts through our study, through asking questions, through deeper research. And then once we clarify those doubts, then we develop a conviction that is firm and use meditation as a way to make that conviction in whatever the topic is to be inseparable from our mind, right? So we need to embrace all of the techniques that the Buddha has taught us. That isn't just, listening to the teachings and then accepting them. It's studying and then contemplating, wrestling with this material. We spent so long in samsara that, of course, our instinct is going to be that samsara is the way to go and that the spiritual path is more work than it's worth. That's going to be our instinct because that's what we've done for countless lifetimes. So we wrestle with these ideas. That's good. And then as we wrestle with them and we become convinced that this is the actual way to real happiness for ourselves and for others, then we meditate on it. And we're constantly doing all of those because they reinforce each other, So we don't have to have perfect realizations before we meditate or perfect conviction. We have to use whatever amount of conviction we have. And then as we meditate on it, then that'll develop greater conviction. It'll highlight more doubts. It'll then allow us deeper understanding and it'll allow us to build. So everything is reinforcing. The whole path of practice reinforces itself. Study, contemplate, meditate. When you go to retreat, if you're doing an actual meditation retreat or even just your daily meditation practice, you have to bring all of the study that you've done with you into that practice. Even if all you're doing every day is spending 20 minutes doing a mindfulness meditation, all of the study you do should come with you, should inform that practice. And then that practice of just calming your mind then should inform all of the subsequent study you do afterwards because they're not separate. All of it is part of the same practice. So it has to be this holistic approach to understanding that we have to make the use of this precious human rebirth, which is to say, actively look at our self-cherishing mind and how much harm it is causing us, do everything in our power to abandon it, and in the process, relocate the center of our lives from our own happiness to the happiness of others. And in so doing, we find peace, contentment, joy, relaxation, and we benefit others, right? When we realize that these afflicted minds that are the greatest enemies we could ever conquer, or we could ever experience, don't exist the way they appear to us, then why would we continually give in to them? Why would we let them hold power over our lives the way they do? So when we realize how feeble they actually are, how their basis has no real grounding, then that encourages us. So right now, it's for no reason, it says, for no real reason, I'm allowing myself to suffer. But when I realize that even the afflicted minds are empty of inherent existence, then that gives me the strength to exert more effort, regardless of how difficult it is, regardless of how uncomfortable it is at times, exert more effort to actually overcome those obstacles. And then the last verse in this chapter is like a summary or a conclusion of the whole chapter. And it says, therefore, having thought about this well, I should try to put these precepts into practice just as they have been explained. If the doctor's instructions are ignored, how will the patient in need of care be healed by his medicines? So this, I think, doesn't need any real explanation. We need to reflect repeatedly on all of the teachings that come from this chapter, especially about how we develop conscientiousness that helps us recognize what's going on in our life, recognize our experiences, recognize how we're reacting to the world around us. Through developing conscientiousness, we point that conscientiousness towards our practices of engaging in virtue as well as abandoning the afflicted minds. And as we take that awareness of conscientiousness towards abandoning the afflicted minds, we see that there are many benefits to abandoning the afflicted minds, that it takes effort, but we should never allow ourselves to be weary, but instead develop joyful perseverance in our effort, in our work to abandon them. And through that, we develop enthusiasm because we recognize that by abandoning them, we are freeing ourselves in the most meaningful of ways, right? So we develop enthusiasm and we reflect on this. We develop conviction in the validity of these teachings, and then we actually bring them into our everyday lives and into our practice. Because if we don't do that, then there's no benefit, If the doctor prescribes you medicine and you don't take it, you're not going to get better. Even if you know this is the best doctor and you know this is the perfect medicine, but then you put it on your shelf and you don't ever take it, it doesn't matter how much conviction you have. It doesn't matter how much faith you have. If that medicine, it just sits there and you look at it every day. So we have to develop conviction in the teachings, but then we have to apply them. We apply them in our meditation practice, that helps strengthen our conviction, and it helps make them second nature. And then we apply them when we live in the world and as we engage in our everyday worldly lives. Okay. So we finished the fourth chapter, which is great. The next time we return to this text, we'll be starting with the fifth chapter, though that's not going to be next week. Like I said, next week is like a special occasion where we are going to be talking about bodhicitta and the bodhisattva vows, and then that's going to be a shortened class, and then we'll have the aloke light offering ceremony. And there's more information you can find out from the center director and the other volunteers at the center about that. But then we'll return to start the next chapter, which is very exciting. But for now, are there any questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Pradeep here. So I want to understand or recognize if an action is a self-care or self-cherishing act. Is it considered as a self-care or self-cherishing of a particular action? How to distinguish or how to recognize? And so if we are actually on the path of on the self-care, so is it good or not?
So to determine if an action that you're taking is an active self-care or an act of self-cherishing, you have to say, what is the motivation behind this action, right? And so we can look at the self-cherishing mind as any mind that prioritizes my own happiness over the happiness of others, that says my own well-being is more important than the well-being of others. And then we can look at the permutations of the self-cherishing mind, such as any mind that says the reason I'm doing this action is because I'm seeking out my own pleasure or my own profit, or I'm seeking out compliments, I'm seeking out fame, right? Or I'm trying to avoid displeasure, I'm trying to avoid some sort of financial loss, I'm trying to avoid criticism, I'm trying to avoid a bad reputation. If those motivations are what are causing us to engage in this action, right, then it is not an act of self-care. If this action is this being inspired by my own attachment, my own desire for worldly comfort or worldly happiness, then that's not self-care. That's self-cherishing. Now, since we live in the world and it's difficult to live in samsara because samsara is hard, sometimes we have to engage in worldly actions and accept that this is what I need to do right now to take care of myself. So sometimes, it's been a long day. I just need to go have a bowl of ice cream. And yes, I'm indulging in my attachment for ice cream. And yes, that is not necessarily healthy for my body or my mind because I'm feeding my attachment. But I recognize that I've had such a stressful day that if I want to be able to regulate my mind to such an extent that I can actually be useful and I can actually use my mind in a meaningful way, that this is a temporary worldly means that I'm using as a temporary stopgap measure, right? So that's something we have to do sometimes, whatever it may be. It may be I listen to music for an hour. It may be I veg out on the couch and watch Netflix for a show or two. It may be that I do these things, these worldly things. But we can do that recognizing that that is not actually genuine self-care. What that is us recognizing that due to the circumstances and due to the resources we have available to us, both physical resources and emotional resources, that this is a necessary band-aid, right? Real self-care is attempting to be free from all the suffering of samsara. Real self-care is looking at worldly pleasure and saying that anything that seeks out worldly pleasure is running after samsara and grasping onto it as if it were real happiness. So real self-care is developing a mind of renunciation that says worldly happiness only brings about suffering in the long run. So I can't grab onto it as if it were real happiness. I have to develop an actual genuine wish to be free from the suffering of samsara. And I have to develop a genuine wish or recognition that others' happiness and well-being is more important than my own and dedicate my actions toward that end. That is actual self-care. So when you look at your actions, and you say, is this self-care or is this self-cherishing? It's not always black and white. It might be that I need to engage in this slight self-cherishing because I've been in samsara so long. I know that if I don't do this, I'm going to spiral and it's going to get worse. But this will be like a bridge that lets me then engage in more meaningful practice. It is temporary. And eventually I won't need this bridge anymore, right? So we have to be honest with ourselves. about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then in that act of being honest, we accept that we're samsaric beings doing the best we can, right? If it was easy, then we'd be Buddhas already. So we have to do the best we can with whatever resources we have, but be honest with ourselves in the process.
Thank
Does
you.
that help?
Thank you.
Yeah. It is always important to remember, or rather investigate, is this action I'm doing feeding my attachment to the samsara, or is it feeding my wish to be free from samsara, right? That is something we can always reflect on. And if it's doing one and not the other, then it's only actually harming us in the long run. So making sure you try to cultivate a bodhicitta motivation with whatever you do, even if you're engaging in worldly activity, is really important, because that bodhicitta motivation transforms worldly activity into spiritual activity, or at least moves it away from being clinging to samsara. Other questions?
Venerable?
Yes. Hello.
Okay, so with respect to equanimity, as it's the basic foundation to, both the any developing any bodhicitta practices. So when we talk about equanimity, one is, are we also looking at equanimity towards the eight worldly concerns? And so how do you really see equanimity? Because actual equanimity, when you're saying that all beings are one, will come only when we walk towards and see emptiness of self and others. But so the confusion I have is that if you're talking about equanimity, developing it towards eight worldly concerns as well as towards the afflictive emotions, as they arise, we know they're empty. So can you really do one short meditation to really know how to develop equanimity, or is it?
Okay, so a few things. One, I'm not quite sure what you mean by equanimity with regard to the eight worldly concerns and the other
Yeah.
afflictive minds. So we're not developing equanimity, as we understand it here, is recognizing that the way we engage in relationships with other sentient beings is based on our own prejudices and our own afflictive minds,
Right.
right? And so equanimity is recognizing that those are all superimpositions that don't actually have any reflection on the nature of sentient beings. And so it's making it so we are impartial. So in this sense, equanimity is trying to develop a sense of impartiality, where we're not only seeking out to benefit the ones we care about, and we're ignoring the ones that we don't care about. So that's what we're talking about with equanimity here. So you shouldn't be you shouldn't develop equanimity towards the eight worldly concerns because you want to abandon them, right? So you shouldn't look at them as not being harmful. However, as you say, you're right that like just thinking, okay, I'm going to be impartial to all sentient beings. That's not how it works, right? It's not that easy. But we try to cultivate it in the same way when we do a meditation on bodhicitta and we go through, let's say, even the 7 steps of a sangha. We start with equanimity, then recognizing all sentient beings as your mother. I've done this meditation hundreds of times. I still don't look at other sentient beings and immediately think of them as my mother because this takes effort, right? And so all of the steps, they come about through repeated practice. But it's not like the first time you do the practice, all of a sudden I've developed equanimity, right? So you're correct in that equanimity is a goal. It's also the basis, but it's a goal at the same time. Does that make sense?
So, with respect to worldly concerns, why I gotten this ailed is because that's a duality, and that duality actually feeds into my self-cherishing, right? I want pain, I don't want pain, I want pleasure. I want gain, I don't want loss. So
I
that's
see. I
where
see. I
I
see.
got confused. Yeah.
I understand. I understand. So in this regard, it's not necessarily looking at them as you're developing a mind of equanimity. It's just recognizing that these are two aspects of the same coin. So engaging in actions that are trying to avoid displeasure or engaging in actions that are seeking out pleasure, it's not that you have to be impartial to those two things, but you recognize that those are both doing the same thing. They're just doing it from two different angles. Kind of in the same way that I think of love and compassion as two sides of the same coin, right? Love is wishing for everyone to be happy, and compassion is wishing for everyone to be free from suffering. So those are two sides of the same coin. They're not the same, they're separate minds, but they're pointing at the same thing, but just from two different directions. So the eight worldly concerns are similar. Me seeking my own pleasure and me trying to avoid displeasure are really doing the same thing, which is saying that my happiness is more important than others' happiness. And it's just looking at it from two different directions. So having equanimity with regard to that isn't useful. Equanimity is realizing that both of those are harmful, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a follow-up question from what I asked. If you have
Okay.
time, can I ask? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So, with respect to this, so for example, I give a scenario where we travel in a bus and somebody, we got a seat, but some elderly person is starting, right? So, because they did not get a seat. So now in this scenario, sometimes we also feel tired and maybe not able to want to think like what should be the good thing to do it here, right? So
Mm.
this is actually if I give a seat, right? So do you think I'm practicing and the coming out of self-cherishing attitude and then uh, practicing compassion, or should I prioritize my self-care here?
So, this is a great example, especially because, well, first off, to answer your question, if you if your physical situation is such that getting up will cause you extreme disability or harm or debility, right, and cause you some sort of permanent damage, then no, you shouldn't give up your seat because you don't want to be creating long-term damage to yourself if you don't have the mind that will allow you to navigate that in a healthy way. But in general, if it's just been a long day and you're tired and standing up will be a little bit uncomfortable, then yes, you should give up your seat. And you should recognize that by doing so, you're willingly taking on the mild suffering of having to stand on your bus ride, which in the big picture, for most of us, or for most able bodied people, is a mild discomfort, right? You're not putting yourself through torture, but you're accepting that mild discomfort willingly in order to relieve someone else's experience of that discomfort. So that is like lojong in action. It's like tonglen in action. You're willingly taking on suffering in order to give them an opportunity to not experience that suffering, right? And it is an act of compassion because you see them suffering. And even though their worldly suffering is only a small thing, standing on the feet for the next half hour, however long in the bus, by being able to free them from it, you are acting in a compassionate way. And at the same time, you are fighting against your self cherishing because your self cherishing mind says, I deserve to be comfortable. I got here first. I have the seat. I've had a long day. I deserve to sit here for the next half hour. And so you're looking at that self cherishing mind in the face and you're saying, no, you are not ruling my actions, right? So the appropriate thing would be, if you are able to get up and offer the seat. However, once you do that, if you stand there the whole time and you're resentful, and then you develop anger and you say, oh, it should have been me. I can't believe I did this. And, a half hour later, you're saying, I really wish I hadn't given up my seat. Then what you're doing is developing a mind that is resentful towards virtue. So you have to be careful. Once you commit yourself to the virtuous action, and once you commit yourself to the action of giving up your seat in this regard, you have to then celebrate it and rejoice in it. And when you experience discomfort as a result, you shouldn't allow that discomfort to dissuade you and to convince you it was a bad idea. You should celebrate this discomfort and you say, this discomfort is genuine. My body is tired, and yet it's an opportunity for me to accept this suffering willingly and rejoice in the small amount of virtue I've created through this practice of denying my self-cherishing mind and of offering compassion to those sentient beings, of prioritizing their happiness over my own. So you have to be careful not to ever regret virtuous actions, right? But in general, yes, that your example is like a perfect one. And the reason I laughed is because when I was in grad school, one of my classes, we were talking about specifically exchanging self and others. And my teacher, who's my advisor, who I love dearly, but he's like, come on now, like exchanging self and others, isn't that just like a party trick? Like, like what are you really doing? You're not swapping places with them. And, he was pointing out that the point of this is to help change the way you understand the world and the way your mind exists. But he brought up this example. He's like, so if you're on the bus, if you're on the T, which is what the metro is called in Boston, he's like, if you're on the T and someone else comes and there's no seats left, would you get up to give them your seat? And I was like, well, yeah, of course I would. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, of course. But so this example is one that comes up, I think, in every culture because we're all used to being on public transit and being exhausted because public transit is never any fun. So it doesn't matter what country you're in. This is an example that comes up. But yeah, to give up your seat is a very small thing, but our lives are made up of small things that add together. That's how we experience change, both worldly change, right? Looking to have worldly effect in the world, but also emotional change and inner change. It's not all one wild, glorious revolution. It happens a little piece at a time. And so if you're able to give up your seat on a bus, that does not seem like a big thing, but it is a step towards Buddhahood. And the way we get to Buddhahood is one step at a time. So it even though it seems small, it actually is huge.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so I don't want to rush us through a meditation. So we'll end today without a meditation, which has kind of been my status quo. But I will remind us of the steps of the 11-point step of Tsongkhapa's combined meditation to develop bodhicitta, the 11 steps of it. I'll remind us of that. And if you have any questions about them, you can ask them now. And then I encourage you all to do this practice on your own today, right? At some point today, take a half hour and actually go through these steps. And if you need to, set a timer and therefore like do 5 minutes on each step. Start with 5 minutes so when you sit down to meditate, generate a mind of refuge and bodhicitta, even just reciting that 4-line verse 3 times that we started our session with. And then once you generate a strong motivation that I'm doing this today to improve my mind for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then maybe spend 5 minutes or so just calming your mind, doing watching your breath or some other placement meditation to help center yourself. And then once you do that, you go through each of these steps and you can spend maybe 5 minutes on each step, right? Which will be a little more than 30 minutes for your practice. So if you could carve out like 45 minutes, then you can do this in a nice kind of robust way and set a timer for yourself. And if you don't have that long, then set a timer for 3 minutes and do each step for 3 minutes, however long you're able to do. So again, you start by kind and doing some sort of placement meditation. Focusing on the breath is the easiest. Then the first step is going to be developing a mind of equanimity. So that is a mind that recognizes that there's no distinction across sentient beings, that you develop an impartiality that isn't focusing only on the sentient beings that you care about and ignoring the ones you don't care about. So you recognize that all sentient beings are equal and that they deserve to have happiness, and they all are equal and that they don't deserve to suffer. And they're all equal in the fact that they wish to be free from suffering. And that any partiality I have, whether I label them friend, enemy, or stranger, is only due to my own afflicted mind. It's only due to my own attachment, my own anger, or my own ignorance that I impose these labels. And then I treat those labels as if they were reality, right? So I react to the label as opposed to reacting to the sentient being. And so that is something you want to undo and develop a mind that doesn't have any partiality and encompasses all sentient beings equally as your object. So that is the first step, equanimity. Then the second step, recognize that all sentient beings have been your mother. Clearly, they're not all your mother in this life, but if you have confidence in past and future rebirths and you understand how karma works, then or at least you have confidence in the validity of karma, then you recognize that if I've been reborn in samsara over and over and over again since beginning this time, then at some point, every sentient being has been my mother at some point. And to be fair, I've been every other sentient being's mother at some point as well. It goes both ways. But that meditation isn't as useful to focus on, but sometimes it helps people. I've been a mother to all sentient beings, and I've been a child to all sentient beings. Sometimes that can help jumpstart your recognition. But this step is to specifically recognize that all sentient beings have at some point been your mother. The fact that they aren't your mother in this life is incidental. It's just arbitrary that you happen to have one mother, one sentient being happens to be your mother in this life, but that's no different than all of the countless sentient beings who have been your mother in past lives. So develop some sort of conviction or belief in this, and that is the second step. The third step, again, is then remembering all of the infinite kindness or great kindness your mother has towards you in this life and in past lives, such as carrying you in their womb, experiencing great physical and emotional distress by carrying you and giving birth to you, by willingly adopting harm to their own body in order to help you, by teaching you how to live in the world, and so forth. All these different types of kindness. And even if you have an antagonistic relationship with your mother in this life, which many of us do, even if that's the case, you can recognize that in general, the relationship between a mother and their child is one of infinite kindness. And if circumstances haven't allowed you to experience it in this life, you still have definitely experienced it in past lives. So you can still try to develop this recognition of your mother's kindness. And then the fourth step, of course, is going to be then developing the wish to repay that kindness. They've been so kind to you in so many lives that you wish to repay it. And then the next step is equalizing self and other. So that is then just recognizing that my happiness is no more important than the happiness of all sentient beings. And in many ways, other sentient beings' happiness is more important than my own, because I'm only one sentient being. Other sentient beings are infinite, and therefore their happiness is more important than my own. So I'm equalizing, right? And that builds into the next two categories. The next one is remembering all of the disadvantages of cherishing myself as more important than others. The chief one being that this is the cause of all suffering. And then the seventh step is going to be remembering all the advantages of cherishing others as more than myself, or cherishing others' happiness as more important than my own. And that is the chief one of those is that is the source of all bliss and joy. Cherishing others is the gateway to all happiness. And then the 8th and 9th steps you do together, and that is practicing Tonglen, which is that to say with a mind of great compassion, the wish that all sentient beings are free from suffering and the cause of suffering, you willingly take on their suffering, especially you can take it on your in-breath. And then as you breathe out, you send out love, the wish for every sentient being to be happy and have all the causes of happiness. And in the process, willingly give away all your happiness to other sentient beings that they might experience it. So Tonglen, the taking of suffering and the giving of happiness is combined with compassion and love as the 8th and 9th steps. And then the 10th step is developing the altruistic intention, that now that you have this genuine wish for others to be happy and to be free from suffering, you accept the responsibility that it's my responsibility to actually free them from suffering. So it's no longer just a vague wish that they have this happiness, but you accept it upon yourself as the responsibility to bring it about. And then you develop a mind of bodhicitta. So this mind that actually sits in the wish to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings, to actualize the altruistic mind. And of course, our bodhicitta is fabricated, it takes effort, but still, you allow that experience of that mind to fill your continuum, and you focus on that. Okay, so those are the 11 steps. So I really encourage you to take a nice, slow time to go through all of them today. If you can take 45 minutes, that's great. If you don't have that much, take a half hour, then that's really the way to go. And try to do that, and I won't rush us through it. But if you have any questions about those, you can ask them now. Otherwise, we will conclude. Yeah.
Yes, Venerable. Can you explain the 10th and 11th steps again?
So the 10th step is the altruistic mind. So it's taking compassion and love, the wish for every being to have happiness and suffering, and saying it's my responsibility to bring that about. So developing the altruism, we call it the altruistic mind, but it's saying it's my responsibility. So it's no longer just the vague wish for other sentient beings to be happy and be free of suffering, but then it's saying it's my responsibility to ensure that they have happiness and that they're free of suffering. And then the 10th step is actual bodhicitta. So actually try to develop the mind that says, as the logical outcome of all these other steps, then the next logical step is the way I actualize that altruistic mind, that responsibility, is by becoming a Buddha. So therefore, the actual wish to become a Buddha in order to bring about the benefit of all sentient beings, which is bodhicitta, then try to generate the actual bodhicitta, seeing it as the natural extension of all the other steps of this process, right? The whole reason these steps go in this order is because one leads to the next, right? So the natural outcome of having love and compassion is developing the wish or the recognition that it's my responsibility to bring about others' happiness. And then the natural result of that is realizing the only way I can bring about others' happiness and their relief from suffering is by becoming a Buddha for their sake. So those are the final two steps. Okay. So if there's no other questions, how about we end with some dedication prayers? So we recognize that through our activity today of studying the teachings of the Buddha as taught by Shantideva, we have accumulated some merit, some good karma. And instead of wishing for that karma to ripen in our own happiness, we generate the actual wish that this merit may be dedicated to others, that it may ripen on others, that it might bring about freedom from all of their suffering, both physical and emotional suffering, that they might find peace in this life and in all future lives, that all other sentient beings might quickly meet Mahayana virtuous friends and quickly become free from all suffering and achieve Buddhahood themselves, And I myself, may whatever merit I've accumulated be dedicated to my own perfect, complete enlightenment, which will allow me to be of maximum benefit to others. So may I achieve Buddhahood more and more quickly so that I might benefit others, and may all the merit I accumulated today be ripened toward my eventual Buddhahood. And so with that, we'll offer just a few prayers of dedication. This first verse we'll do once in Tibetan and then in English, and then we'll do a few others, the remaining ones in English. Choe Sum Ling Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyo Chik Ke Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gone Gondu Pel War Sho. May the supreme jewel of Bodhisattva that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equal in the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit, purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. For my two collections, as vast as space that I've amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds wisdom is clouded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all of my lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of the complete graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings to the points of the path as I have discerned them, and may I uphold the Buddhist teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time, by even this graded path to enlightenment that has been completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. May the king of Dharma, Tsongkhapa's way of Dharma practice flourish. May the omens of obstacles be pacified, and all the conducive circumstances be complete. By relying on the two accumulations of myself and others in the three times, may the teachings of the conqueror Lobsang Drakpa blaze for a long time. Great. Thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you. Thank you. I look forward to seeing some of you next week, either online or in person. And again, we'll have a class, especially with Bodhicitta and the Bodhisattva vows, at the beginning of class. That'll be for about an hour, a little more than an hour. There'll be a short break, and then we'll be offering a light offering ceremony called the Aloke ceremony that you're also welcome to. That'll be online, is right? Well, Deepti?
Yes,
That will be
well,
online.
yeah.
Yeah. So both of those will be available online. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Venerable, for
Thank you.
teaching us today. And this is a wonderful teaching on Acharya Shantideva's Bodhisattva way of life. And thank you all for joining. As a practice that has been given to us by our teachers, I request all of you to please stand up, and we'll make prostrations and end the day. It'll be nice if you can keep your videos open. Thank you. Thank you so much, Venerable. I just need to give you end of session notes, information. Next weekend, like Venerable has said, we will have on Saturday Wheel of Sharp Weapons at the center, and on Sunday we have Aloke. It's a very rare opportunity. We are doing it to kind of commemorate Losar, though the Losar has finished. So we are having Aloke. Aloke, you can sponsor lights for in the name of your family and friends. It's a a day of purification, of kind of offering lights to the Buddhas in all directions. And the light offering is very beautiful. If you can come, please come to the center. We will be chanting jointly and we will be doing prayers. And also, as Venerable said, we will be taking, we can take Bodhisattva vows if our mind allows it to. And if you don't want to, you can still be part of the ceremony. So please come and bring your friends and family as well. All right. Thank you all so much. See you all soon. And
Thank you.
just to let you all know, in April, there will be a retreat that we are organizing. The exact date of the retreat is not yet decided, but somewhere around the area of 17th, 18th, and 19th. And we are looking at Seraj for Seraj in Kushal Nagar, to where the lamas actually live, because Venerable cannot leave and come. Venerable is already being like our main teacher and he's been teaching non-stop. He can't leave there and he has his classes that he has to undergo as per the university commitment. So we will be going there, and for 3 days it will be studying. We are wrapping up Wheel of Sharp Weapons and we're starting a new topic. So it will be a new book. So it will be regarding that. So there will be meditation and extensive teachings. It is very peaceful. So please try and see if you can join. And if you can't, we will try and telecast. That's something that Venerable wants us to do. Yeah. So this time we are also going to see if we can take the center laptop there and hotspot it or whatever telecast for those of you who are far away. But please keep us in mind, the center, and tell your friends about it, and please try and come. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye bye, guys.